don't know what's happened with Facebook um, tonight. It's kind of crazy, and that's disappointing because I wanted to make sure that this was on. Here it is. It's got it. We got it finally. All right,
Praise the Lord.
and then transfer that over there, and then we're good to go. Okay, good deal. All the buttons are pushed now, and we're only 6 minutes late. I apologize for that, but um, yeah, we're seeing some folks that I haven't seen for a while on here, so good to have you with us. And so let's go ahead and begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. And also, we had a chance today. This has been a really busy week and a busy weekend. Um, this morning, I had the opportunity to present Christ in the Passover to First Baptist Church here in Columbus, where we live, and so that was well attended. And I didn't realize that I only had 45 minutes, and I quit an hour and a half after I started. So it was didn't realize I went over that for that long. They didn't tell me how much time I had. So, but anyway, it was a good program, and they asked lots of questions, and so it was good. All right, tonight, just wanted to welcome everybody in. We're starting our study on the book of Hebrews, and I think it's going to be a really um, uh, good study. And thank you, Joseph, for that. Yes, I forgot to mute everybody. And that's, the rules. I'm going to mute everybody, but if you have something to say, then please unmute yourself and say away, because this is a total reactive, proactive, interactive. That's the word I wanted. Interactive program. So anyway, you're all muted now, and if you need to say something, just unmute yourself and say away. All right. So the book of Hebrews, I'm really looking forward to this one because I've got some good books on it, and I'm going to be using some books from people that I know, friends of mine that I've known for a number of years, that just looking at I've like I said, I've known them for years, and this one guy, let me show you the book in case you were ever interested in this. It's Hebrews for the Practical Messianic, and it's John does a really good job on this. The guy just really does a lot of research, and he writes well. And I've got I've got 7 or 8 of his books, in fact, and I know him and his mother and his stepdad, and just good people there in a congregation up in Dallas. In fact, their congregation up there is Etz Chaim, which is Tree of Life in Hebrew. And so anyway, I'm going to be using that book. And then I'm also going to be using this book. Now, this is going to be kind of interesting because this guy was an Orthodox Jew, and he's now a pastor. He's been a pastor for over 20 years, and so he writes the book of Hebrews, and it's not a comprehensive writing. What he's doing here, he said, is not comprehensive. He's not going to go by verse like we normally do in our study, but he's going to talk to us about how his study of Hebrews interacted with his own experience as an Orthodox Jew. And so that's going to be kind of interesting. And then finally, this one here, I bought this one and I'm going through it, and boy, is it nerdy. Okay, I mean, it goes into details. I mean, the introduction to this, just his introductory notes to Hebrews was 97 pages long. And so that's boy, that really gets into it deep. So anyway, that's going to be kind of interesting too. All right, so let's go. I'm going to
Excuse
tonight.
me. That's
Huh?
better than this stupid book I've got, but and it's only a couple pages of Hebrews, but they say the writer's thesis is that Christianity is not only God's planned replacement for Judaism and
Okay.
further more and more. So I'm like, wait a minute here.
Okay, well, if they say that Christianity is the replacement for Judaism
We need
and
to get
the
rid of
Jewish
that book.
people, okay, take that one and line your birdcage with it. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Okay. Um, so something that I came across yesterday, just yesterday, okay, in our Torah club class. And of course, Carmen, you were there, and Colette, you were there, and a number of you were in there, and someone, and I don't even remember now who it was, made the observation that the possible reason that so many modern religious leaders and lay people fail in their walk with the Lord is that they've not built their faith on the foundation of Torah. And the Torah is God's standard of holiness. That's where he lines out um, where what is right, what is wrong. It's absolute. Torah is absolute. There is um, there's nothing in there that we could look at and say, well, it's kind of nuanced, and it's it's black and white, and man, there is not a whole lot of wiggle room there about what is permissible and what is not permissible. So that's, in my view, Torah is not a nuanced document. It's a firm foundation on which we have the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, and some people call it the apostolic writings. And so for us to understand the epistles and the other writings in the New Testament, I feel it's imperative that we know and we understand the Tanakh, the Old Testament, the whole Old Testament. And that is the foundation for everything that comes after. And so that's why I like to teach from the Old Testament and bring in um, a lot of the things that are in that with the scriptures and so anyway, that's where I'm coming from with now studying this book of Hebrews. Now, all right, so I'm going to go through about 6 things here tonight as an introduction, and then next week we will jump into like we normally do, chapters with verse by verse and try to dissect it. And we may not be able to get through one chapter per week as we go through Hebrews, because it's there's a lot to unpack in Hebrews, and I think that I want to make sure that we have a good understanding about it from a cultural and a historical and an ecclesiastical point of view. So let's look at number one.
That's good. Thank you.
Who
Yes,
was who is the author of the book of Hebrews? Now, it was the book of Hebrews was written from the perspective of someone who knew the Tanakh, knew the Hebrew Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible front to back, upside down and backwards. He knew it cold, and he knew the customs and the practices of the Levitical priesthood in great, great detail. And so Hebrews was written by someone with the religious education of Rav Shaul, the Paul the Apostle, but he had a much higher command of the Greek language. Now we think of Paul as being, he's a great theologian. He's He has great arguments and so forth, but he himself says, you know what, my Greek is kind of coarse. It's not polished like some other scholars would be. But we find in Hebrews that the level of Greek in Hebrews is it's like on a whole higher plane, much higher plane than what Paul normally would write. And so even though he was brilliant in theology and he was an expert in the law, you know, there's reason to say that he wasn't. Now most of the scholars on this subject are not really dogmatic on it. Okay, I mean there's people that they'll give an opinion as to it, but if you look back at some of the early church fathers, there the guy named Origen, who was in the Alexandrian church, and he died about 255 A.D. or CE, I guess you're supposed to say, but no one knew for sure who the writer of he said no one knows who the writer of Hebrews is, and so he studied it and studied it, and he says, but who it was that really wrote the apostle, God only knows. And so that's like I tell people sometimes when I said, look, I don't know the answer. God only knows the answer, and he ain't telling. And so that's kind of the way we have with Hebrews. The language of the epistle is both in both vocabulary and style. It's more pure and a more vigorous defense of its theology than any other book in the New Testament. The vocabulary is just a lot of words in it, and it includes a large number of words that you won't find anywhere else in the apostolic writings. And so some of the words that you'll find in the book of Hebrews is you'll only find it in Greek scriptures, in the Septuagint, okay, which is the Greek translation of the Bible. All right, so so we can say that what we can say with certainty is that Hebrews is composed by a very creative theologian who was well trained in the Greek scriptures, meaning the Septuagint, and he was surely then a Hellenistic Jewish believer. All right, and so various scholars have made cases for Paul as being one, Apollos being another, and Barnabas and Luke, Peter, Jude, Stephen, Silvanus, which was Silas, and Epaphroditus, Philip the evangelist, Priscilla, Mary, the mother of Yeshua, was said may have been one of them. May have been the writer, which that's, I don't know where that. Well, I have a feeling I know where that one came from. But then also Clement of Rome, who was a disciple of Peter the apostle. And there's Aristion and others. So, but the writing in Hebrews uses a masculine participle and so forth as when they're writing, and that to tell, and that kind of refers to the writer himself as a male, and so that would rule out any female writer. And so if you're not looking at your chat down there, Warren says the root word of Torah speaks of instruction rather than simply law. God gave his Torah as a loving gift to his people and as a guideline for living happy and healthy and holy. very true. The Torah does mean instruction, and it's just been kind of mistranslated as law, as something illegal, a legal document, but it's more just God's instruction, his standard of holiness that he had for us. So I think that there are. I listed some of these choices here with talked about Paul, Rav Shaul, and Barnabas. He was a contemporary of Paul. They traveled together. Barnabas was a Levite. He um, he was acquainted with the other apostles. He was a contemporary of them, not even though he himself did not know Yeshua personally. He was a contemporary of the apostles and would have gotten information from them, and so his knowledge of Yeshua would be secondhand knowledge, like a lot of them would be. And but there again, we do have something that did not make it into the canon of the New Testament, was the epistle of Barnabas. And so then you had Apollos. Again, he was one of these guys that was a contemporary of Paul. Paul spoke very highly of Apollos. He was mentored by two early believers from Rome, Priscilla and Aquila. And so again, Apollos was very knowledgeable of the scriptures. His use of wording. The problem with Apollos is that we don't have any surviving documentation from or something from that time frame where the early church fathers or whatever, the early leaders of the movement pointed to Apollos as being the man for writing of Hebrews. So we just don't know, and so I think that's the early believers originally accepted all the New Testament books as inspired by God because they each contain teaching from an official apostle. Okay, and so for this reason, then we can possibly say that the writer was probably either one of the apostles, maybe, who knows, or at least a close associate of it, one or more of the apostles. So basically, we have to just conclude that guess what? We don't know who the writer of the book of Hebrews was. And from up until, if I remember right, up until about 1600 or something, they the book of Hebrews was actually referred to as the epistle of Paul to the Hebrews. And so then, but after 1600, that title kind of fell out of favor, and the most original title of Hebrews, and we'll get to in a minute. I can show you here, right here. In Greek, it's pros Hebreos. Okay, and for those of you who are Greek speakers, I apologize for my pronunciation of Greek, but that's what it means, for or to the Hebrews. Okay, and it does not mean against the Hebrews. It's for or to the Hebrews. All right, so let's look at now the location of the author. Now, are there any comments or questions that someone might have on this? Jump in
Yeah, I
there.
got a question, Rabbi.
Okay, hang on just a second. The phone is over here ringing, and I gotta turn it off. Okay, this is important. I gotta give it to my wife. Hang on. Hello. Hello. Okay. Okay, we're trying to we're trying to put together all of this Purim stuff, and then one of the ladies there was calling Pat, and so she'd forgot her phone in here. My apologies. All right, Juan, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, was the New Testament always in Greek? Was it found in Greek?
Was the New Testament written in Greek? Yes, it was.
So,
There are those that try to say that say the book of Matthew was written in Hebrews, was written in Hebrew, but there is absolutely no existing evidence or anything that um, that Matthew was written in Hebrew, and for you know, for the most part, Hebrew was not really that much of a spoken language during the time of Yeshua. They spoke Aramaic, and Hebrew was mostly a liturgical language. And there are some people that, and I've had this discussion with folks about the the language of the New Testament, and I think there's um, I've got a couple of books over here in my library about the difficult words of Yeshua, and they're written by a couple of guys that their whole premise is that the Bible, the New Testament, or at least Matthew, was written in Hebrew, and so that some of the things that they said in Hebrew or in the book, they have to. You said they would say you have to turn it back into Hebrew, and then it makes sense. Um, and so, but we have there's no surviving documentation that anything in the New Testament was written originally in Hebrew. Now, Delitzsch, who was a brilliant German theologian and scholar, took in the 1800s, he took the New Testament, translated it, or redid it from the Greek into Hebrew, and then from there back into German, and then we have an English version of what he wrote that was based on some of that. So it's like two or three translations deep to get it back to the English. And while there's some good stuff in there, I'm not really sure that I would want to rely on something that is a third generation translation from the Greek and say that no, we have to turn it into Hebrew before we can understand it. So maybe some of you other guys that are a little bit more scholarly than me on that can jump in there, but I find no place where there's no evidence that any of the books of the New Testament were written originally in Hebrew. Only people would like to have them written in Hebrew. Okay.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody may have told you something different, and
Yeah,
um,
I heard arguments, and I went to a congregation that they said that it was if Greek was being corrupted, and you have to have it in Hebrew and stuff like that.
well, I think that's a problem in when people go around and start saying, well, the Bible that you guys have relied on all these years is corrupted, and we have to go back to now what we have come up with as the Bible. And to me, that raises a flag. Um, you know, a little bit when somebody says, well, we have new interpretation, and um, so forth. So, anytime somebody says, well, we have new revelation from the Lord about something, I go, okay, just hold off. Okay, now Warren said that there's a few scholars who posit Aramaic originals for certain of the gospel based upon idioms in the text, which only make sense in the original language. Yes, I've read those things that there was an Aramaic version of the Bible that was around 700 A.D. And I think what's that called? Warren the Peshitta, something like that. And yeah, it's I know that there are a lot of things in the Gospels that when you look at them, you say, okay, you can sort of recognize it as a Hebrew idiom or something in that would have made a little bit better sense in Hebrew. But the problem is Hebrew was not that much of a universal language. Greek was, and they're trying to get this out to as many people as possible. So that's why it was in Greek. Okay, the question that came out, Dead Sea Scrolls were written in Hebrew. Yes, they were. Okay. There was Hebrew, and then there was a little bit of Aramaic in the book of Daniel. But the Dead Sea Scrolls, the parts that we've been able to recover, that was Hebrew. Okay. But that's all the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's all Old Testament stuff. None of that is New Testament. All right. By the time the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by the Essenes in Qumran, that the New Testament had not been, what we call the New Testament canon, had not been put together yet, and so they were all just still on the Old Testament. The same scriptures that Yeshua and all the disciples had was the Old Testament. All right. So, okay, Martha.
Yes, sir. I'm just curious. You mentioned that there was a male. Is that the right one? Correlation to a pronoun usage in Hebrews that would kind of rule out any female author. So why would Priscilla's name even be mentioned as a consideration, or even Mary, the mother of Yeshua? Why would that? What is in there that would give an indication towards some female author?
I'm not really sure as to how they picked those one. That Mary, the mother of Yeshua, I think that would come from the Catholic Church. Okay, as far as a possibility. Now, where Priscilla came in there, she was a prominent person within the body of Messiah at that time. She and her husband Aquila were mentors of Apollos, so they were teachers.
Yes.
But the writing of that, it was the use of a pronoun there would indicate, it indicates that it was a male writer as opposed to a female writer. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so all right. So then somebody came up with, how do you feel about the Book of Jubilees? Well, that is apocryphal book that was not included in the original canon. And while some of these books have historical value, for whatever reason, when it was all put together, they did not make it into the canon that we use. I know Book of Jubilees, Maccabees, Tobit, Judith, and there's other Enoch, and some others are all in the Catholic Bible, and the apocryphal. And I've got them, in my library. Refer to them once in a while when it's appropriate, but all I can go by is what we have for that is accepted canon today about the various books. So I'm not going to pass judgment on them because somebody had already done that 2,000 years ago. So that's the coward's way out, Jonathan. I'm telling you that right now. I don't really have an opinion Book of Jubilees, other than, it did not get accepted into our normal canon. And so I don't look at it as the same level of spiritual authenticity that we would. I've had the same argument with the the epistle of Barnabas in arguing with, I'd like to say a discussion with, but no, it was just a down and out argument with a group of folks that said that if a person they were a fringe, I feel a fringe group of Messianic Judaism, that they referred to the book of Barnabas to prove their point that if a man becomes a believer in Yeshua and he is not circumcised, then he should be circumcised in today's world, even though all of the writings of Paul and in Galatians said, no, you don't do that. And their argument was, yeah, but Paul didn't really mean to say that, and Barnabas did. And so we should accept the epistle of Barnabas because that, that kind of proves our point. And, that's when somebody brings in something that's not even in the Bible to prove their point, then you just have to, they're going to believe what they want to believe to do whatever they want to do. And so that was a problem. And so I was only there as a visitor. I was building a drilling rig or rebuilding a drilling rig, and so I would come in on Shabbat when I wasn't offshore or something like that. And they knew I was a rabbi over in Houston, and so they would ask me questions. I'd give them the answers that I had, and it did not coincide with what they were teaching, and so people in the congregation, whenever their leader there would say something, or his wife would say something, that then they would look over at me to get my reaction as to, would I shake my head no, or just something. And so once I saw that, I went to their they called him pastor. He didn't say he was a rabbi. Once I saw that, I told him, I said, look, I'm being disruptive just by sitting here and not saying a word. And I said, that I don't want to be that way, that guy in your congregation. So, and we left on friendly terms, but I didn't want to be disruptive. The question was here, how common was the name of Yeshua in the Hebrew culture for naming children? Very common. It was a very common name, like Yochanan was a common name. Ezekiel was a common name. Zechariah was a common name, and Yeshua, it's a form of Yehoshua, which was Joshua, meaning salvation. So the name of Yeshua was a fairly common name, and you see it in other writings from, say, Josephus. I've run across the name Yeshua in other writings. Okay, so all right. Going ahead, the location of where was the author when he wrote the book of Hebrews. And so this is another question without an answer, or the answer is I don't know. And so there's two major theories that are based on one single verse that right at the very end of the book, in Hebrews 13:24, at the end of it, the author says, greet all your leaders and all the Kedoshim. Those from Italy greet you. And so this phrase that gets the attention is those from Italy greet you. So we have two possibilities there. One, the book was written in or around Rome, or the book was written in the diaspora, but not in Rome. One of the other Jewish communities that dotted the Asia Minor or the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. The Turkey, Ephesus, Antioch, on down to Alexandria or something, places like that, or Corinth, maybe even in Greece, and so it just depends a lot on how you interpret the the words. Those from Italy greet you. Now, the first opinion is that the author was in Italy or in the vicinity of Rome, and the references to those of okay, all of us here in all the folks here in Italy send you their greetings. And so that's a reference to the believers that were in Italy at the time. There's another one by another scholar that says that this message was it was a message sent by Italians who were with the author, and so for him this was evidence that the book was a letter written from a place outside of Italy and addressed to a group inside of Italy. And so this interpretation is also, if you look in the Revised Standard Version, that those from Italy greet you, they render it a little differently. They says, those who come from Italy send you greetings. Okay. And so there again, that's how you interpret the Greek there. So while we can't know for certain where the author was when he wrote this document, I think we can fairly well assume that it was most likely in the diaspora where the Jews had scattered from Israel. And so some of the places that the scholars have looked at have said that, okay, Ephesus, Corinth, Alexandria, Cyprus, and those that view that Apollos may have written the book of Hebrews, that would be a reference to Priscilla and Aquila, who were Jews from Rome, and like I said before, they mentored Apollos. All right, so there again, the location we don't know. All right, so when was the book written? Now this one is a little easier. Most I would say it's widely agreed among most of the conservative and liberal commentators that Hebrews was written sometime near the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE or AD. And it would have been right before that, but not not after that. And because if the temple had already been destroyed, then the language of Hebrews would have been different. It would have, first of all, it would have been mentioned, and so the author here, he considers that the sacrificial system was still in operation, because he makes statements like, there are those who offer gifts according to the law. That's in chapter 8 and verse 4, and whatever is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to disappear. Again, that's a few verses down in chapter 8 and verse 13. And then shifting over into chapter 10:3, it says, in those sacrifices, there is a reminder of sins year by year. If the temple had already been destroyed, the sacrificial system done away with, those statements would not really make a whole lot of sense. And so we know that the writer of Clement of Rome, he was like I said, he was a student of the Apostle Peter, and he wrote his epistles to the churches in around 95 AD or CE. I jump back and forth between those all the time, but he has quite a few references that are in the book of Hebrews. So he refers back to the book of Hebrews. So that would point to that, okay, that letter had been around for about 30 years before Clement of Rome had written that. And so for the purposes of this study that I'm going to be doing here in Hebrews for the next few weeks, we're just going to follow the standard conservative position that the date of the writing of Hebrews was somewhere from 60 to 69 AD. Okay, just prior to the destruction of the temple, but still likely close enough to like the Jewish revolt had already started in the land, and of course now the Bar Kokhba revolt, that's in 135 AD, so that's much further out. That's that'd be another 60, 70 years later. But there was still a growing revolt that that's why the Romans had sent their troops back into Israel to just put down things. And plus the Jews were, I mean, the different factions of Jews, they were killing each other off all the time, and that disrupted trade, that disrupted tax base. And so that's why the Romans, they didn't care about the Jews, but they cared about their tax base, and so they were trying to put down any trouble there. And that was already beginning. All right, Martha.
Yes, sir. Could this be a different generation of believers then? Maybe the parents have died off. These are the kids coming along now because of the disruption of belief and trying to revert back to Judaism. Could this be another generation of believers, or those seeking to find out what to believe?
Okay, this was
yeah.
I think that this is we're going to do that in the next question, but to answer your question, yes, this was to a group of people who were maybe one generation or at least a few years divorced from the people who were contemporaries of the disciples and would maybe have known Yeshua when he was on earth. And so okay, so here we got Warren said and I'm reading these things because some of you can read the chat, but those of you that are on phones cannot. This chapter proclaims Yeshua as surpassing any earthly being or even any angelic being. It's very much an encouragement to Jewish believers not to turn back to reliance upon the Levitical system in the absence of Yeshua. Remember, the temple has not yet been destroyed, has not yet returned, and the majority of even Gentile believers were meeting in the synagogue. Those who believed Yeshua to be the Messiah were still considered to be only a sect within Judaism. Yes, the believers, the ones, the Nazarene, the followers of the way, they called them the way, and the followers of the Nazarene, they were considered just another faction of Judaism for many years, up until actually the Bar Kokhba revolt. And at that point, then, when the believers in Yeshua refused to participate in the revolt because they started calling Bar Kokhba the Messiah. He was the Messiah, and they said, "Oh no, he was not the Messiah, and we're not going to support him in that, because then that would be like us saying, yeah, that we're endorsing him as the Messiah." And even Rabbi Akiva later on had to renege on that, calling him the Messiah, because guess what? He lost in great fashion, and the Roman the Roman army just really, it was a bloodbath in Jerusalem and in Israel following the fall of Bar Kokhba. All right, so who's the target audience here? Now, the original recipients of the epistle are also unknown. So we don't know who wrote it. We don't know where he wrote it from. We only have a vague idea of when he wrote it. and now we don't even know who he wrote it to. The title, Epistle to the Hebrews, implies that they were Jewish believers, and all the earliest surviving scrolls used the Greek title, well, like I said already, Pros Hebreos, and it's so it's probably a safe assumption that the as to the identity of these first readers. References in the epistle also suggest that the original readers were mainly Jewish. Okay, mainly Jewish. The writer assumed that, and we can infer from this material that his readers were very familiar with the institutions of Judaism, the sacrificial system, the Levitical system, and rabbinical writings, and so forth. The warnings against turning away from Yeshua back to the old covenant also imply the Jewish identity of his original audience. So other indications of a Jewish target audience is that emphasis on the superior priesthood of Yeshua and the many appeals to the authority of the Hebrew scriptures. And so the one caveat that I would throw in here is that this brand of Judaism in view seems to have been a Hellenistic view rather than the traditional Hebraic Judaism. Meaning, what does that mean? Okay, it means that they were the writer was using the Septuagint, which was a Greek translation of the Hebrew rather than the Hebrew itself. And so we can't positively identify the recipients of this first batch, or the first draft of Hebrews. There are some that say, well, they were sent to a former Jewish priests, probably the Essenes, that the people in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scroll fame. And so I don't personally, I looked at that and I said, I'm not really sure that I believe that, because the Essenes are not mentioned anywhere within the book. And we don't have anything from the writings, the Dead Sea Scrolls, or anything that would indicate that they were, they had received this or they were part of that. Okay. So there's a reference to the generosity of the readers in Hebrews and helping other believers. That's in chapter 6 and verse 10. So that suggests that the original audience did not live in Israel proper, because the Israel-based congregations, they were quite well known and had a reputation for needing material assistance, because the Romans were really beaten down on them hard by this time, and the country, the overtaxed, and so rather than being able to give to other believers, they were on the receiving end because of their financial situation in Israel. And so that just leads again to where we think that the recipients of the book were probably in the diaspora. So the conclusion is that the writer's consistent use of the Septuagint Old Testament version, and all the quotations from the Old Testament, except for 2, were taken from the Septuagint. So Hellenistic Jews use this translation widely, but Israel-based Jews did not use it as much. It was there, but they had the Hebrew translations there that while they didn't speak a true form of Hebrew, they spoke Aramaic. They had the Targum, which was a paraphrase or an explanation, a translation for the Jews in Israel, so that they would understand what the Hebrew actually said. and that's what the Targum was, is just their kind of a little translation from the Hebrew to Aramaic for them. But they didn't use Greek so much. But the Hellenistic Jews, the ones in the diaspora that lived outside of Israel, they used it a good bit. So anyway, that I just think that most of the target audience would have been outside of Jerusalem, outside of Israel. And so again, some of the choices that they had, there in most of the New Testament congregations, there was a mixture of Jewish and Gentile believers, kind of like Messianic congregations today, where, you know, we have in our congregation, probably 25% of our congregation are Jewish and the rest are Gentile. And so the appeal of this epistle would certainly have been great for the Gentiles who they were tempted to return to paganism sometimes. And so, and it would have also, the Jews would have faced the temptation of returning to Judaism, because why? Well, the persecution was out there that is starting to get persecuted. The believers in Yeshua were starting then to come under the microscope of Rome, and they were beginning to be persecuted, and they're losing their privilege of, you know, well, they weren't Jews, and so they weren't under the thumb of the Romans as much. But now the Romans are the Roman lions were getting hungry, and so the Messianic Jews and Jews in general were losing their legal status and legal protection. So the writer's primary concern appears to have been that his Jewish readers were failing to appreciate that belief in what I would call the salvific work of Yeshua, and as the divinely revealed successor to the earlier sacrificial-based Judaism. Okay, they just really didn't have a good handle on that. He didn't want them to abandon that belief in Yeshua and return to Judaism. I think Warren had already touched on that. So the letter probably, or possibly, I don't like to say probably, went to a house-based church, or, you know, house church kind of a thing outside of the land of Israel that had a strong Hellenistic Jewish population. So that congregation could have been in Galatia, near, or, you know, somewhere in Galatia up in Turkey, and there's reason to believe that. And then, you know, some scholars believe that the letter went first to Rome and then spread from there. So obviously, I mean, we just don't know. The to whom this was sent has been lost to us. So some of the thoughts were Rome, you know, as being one of the earliest reference to Hebrews, come from Rome in the epistle of Clement. You know, 1 Clement, first book of Clement, was written in 95 CE, and I think you should note that at that point there were 40 to 60,000 Jews that lived in and around Rome, and so there are those that say that would have been about 20% of the population of Rome at that time, and so a lot of Jews there. Alexandria is, I don't know about that 20% thing, but Rich says that they were encouraged to lay hold of the hope set before them in Christ our Lord, and that's in 6:18 to 20, and that's what I'm saying, that's one of the things that the writer is wanting them to hang on to, this hope that we have in Yeshua. Alexandria was another place that was favored by the scholars because Alexandria was a great repository of wealth and knowledge of the library there in Alexandria just had all of the knowledge of the world written in those scrolls. Unfortunately, it burned to the ground, but by an accident. But that was one of the things. And those that favor Alexandria also tend to favor Apollos as the author of Hebrews because he was a native of the city of Alexandria. So other possibilities are Corinth, Ephesus, Cyprus, and Antiochus. And so all of these cities had sizable Jewish population and were well established within the ancient world. But there are some that, what we can kind of deduce is that this was not written to Jewish believing populations in the land of Israel at that point. Certainly, it would have been appropriate for them, but it just doesn't fit some of the things that are in the book of Hebrews to the situation of those in the land of Israel. All right, so I guess running on with this, the relevancy of Hebrews today. All right, this is one of the strongest pro-Torah texts that we have. So we just, I think I got my notes out of whack here. Let me go back here. Okay, let me do this. The theological messages, I scrolled down too many. The theological message of Hebrews. Going to go through this, and we'll be going through this next few weeks strongly. Yeshua is the major theme of the book of Hebrews, okay? Without a doubt, that is the one thing. You look at the book of Hebrews, you see Yeshua. And what is he talking about? His superiority, or the superior nature of his sacrifice over the sacrifices of the animals and so forth. And another theme of this would be faith of the patriarchs. Chapter 11, of course, that's that great faith chapter talking about the faith of the patriarchs and the prophets. And another part of the theological message of Hebrews is that this new covenant is built on the old covenant, and it's a better covenant. And he uses a lot of references back into Jeremiah 31, and a lot of mainstream Christianity today looks at this and says things like, well, see, here's the that the church has replaced. It's better, it's superior, it's just a better thing than the old style Judaism, and that the church has replaced the Jews as God's chosen people, and that's not right. So we'll look into that. And finally, the divinity of Yeshua, very, very important, because a lot of people would say, well, he was the Messiah, but in Judaism, the Messiah did not have to be divine. He could have been a man, and so okay. Joseph says, can you leave us with one verse that captured your study of Hebrews this week? Something we can hold on to during next week until we meet again. Let me see here real quick. I can see if I can pull up something that the theme that the author of Hebrews had come up with, and I don't have my an open Bible because I use all electronic stuff here. But let's look at Hebrews 1, chapter 1, and verse 3. It says that This Son, talking about Yeshua, is the radiance of his glory and the imprint of his being, upholding all things by his powerful word. So from that one verse, then he goes off into talking about the superiority of Yeshua. And so looking at the relevancy, what does it do for us today? All right, one of the strongest pro-Torah texts, so that teaches against this idea that Yeshua nailed the Torah to his cross, and that the Torah has been done away with, God's law has been done away with. No, nothing could be further from the truth. And so it kind of gives us a proper perspective, I think, on the relationship of the old sacrificial system, what it did for the people of Israel and mankind in general, to the new system that is better, where Jeremiah said that, okay, I'm going to give you a new covenant that's better than the old one. It didn't do away with the old one, it just improved the old one. And
Can we say, can we
huh?
say, can we say, like you said, it didn't do away, but Yeshua adds to it. It adds to the old covenant. When you
Well,
say it's better, it's stronger. It adds to the old covenant.
Well, that is true, and that's the same with all of the covenants. All the covenants that came through from the very beginning. There was a covenant with Adam and Eve. There was a covenant with Noah. There was a covenant with
Right.
Abraham. All of them built on the last one. They didn't destroy them. They just added to it, enhanced it, made it better. And so this is what the final covenant here is, that it just makes it better. So, and that's what our study of Hebrews is going to show us, that faith in Yeshua is far superior to anything and everything that we would confront, or I wouldn't even say, things that maybe they don't even confront us. They just kind of sneak up to us a little bit. So that Yeshua is superior to any of that. Okay. Somebody said, Gerald said that you could say that the new covenant is the spiritual successor of the Old Testament, which is good, but we couldn't do it on our own in our flesh, so that God would put his spirit that would write his laws on our hearts and put them in our minds. Well, that's true. And I tell you what, we still can't do it on our own. It's through the shed blood of Yeshua that allows us to be in right standing with God. And so, so I think that kind of hits it on, and I've kind of gone over now because I got started a little bit late, but I think that gives us a kind of a starting point for Hebrews, and we'll be jumping into it next week then, from the chapter 1 and going through that, and again, like I normally do, almost verse by verse. And I can see this one is going to really be one of those that we might go in a week and get through 1 or 2 verses, and that's it. We'll just have to see how that works. Warren, you're open.
Hi there, Rabbi. Excellent study, and I really appreciate it. You're talking about how the believers were meeting in house to house, and I'm sure that was true for places that didn't have a synagogue. But I mean, if you look through the book of Acts, whenever Paul would enter a city, first place he'd go, he'd be preaching in the synagogue, and
for 3 weeks. He would go there for 3 weeks every time.
Yeah. And until if unless you got kicked out, I mean, you were fellowshipping in the synagogue because you're Jew. And of course, remember, the majority of believers in Yeshua at this point, they are Jews. I mean,
that's right.
The biggest controversy in the early church was not whether or not a Jew could receive faith in Messiah, but whether or not a Gentile could become a believer in this Jewish Messiah without first converting to Orthodox Judaism. And of course, thank God, Acts 15, we find out that, that that's not necessary. But basically, it's at this point really, I would say
Well,
that
and you
probably
look at it,
the majority
look
would be Jews.
yeah, look at the timeline. All right, this the decision by Yaakov or James, the brother of Yeshua, to he said he felt he agreed in he felt that the Holy Spirit also directed him that the Gentiles then could come to faith in Yeshua, and so that had only been 15 years before the writing of this, and 15 to 20 years. And so at that in the scheme of things and the way that they didn't have the information world that we have today, that was still kind of a new concept with people. And so it's it's something that is new and different for them, and so yeah, it's just it's going to be. I think it's going to be an interesting way to look.
Absolutely. And of course, I look at this very first part of this chapter. It talks about Yeshua. He's before all. He created all things, and upholds all things by the word of his power. And it causes me to look at like John chapter 1, where it talks about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And amongst Judaism at the time, there was the whole concept of God's memra. Memra was it actually means it means word in Aramaic. So it's in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. But the thing about the memra in Judaism, God's memra was considered to be a manifestation of God Himself, and so it so closely dovetails in with what we're seeing both here in Hebrews and in the Gospel of John of Yeshua being God, that he's there, he's the instrument by which creation was created and all things hold together. So I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, the more you study, you look at any of this stuff, the more your mind gets blown, and you start saying, and you make connections that you never thought you'd ever make. And you'll be studying this for years and years and years and years and years, and you're still going to see something, and you're going to get like an aha moment,
Sure.
And so, but I really appreciate this whole study. I really, really appreciate what you're doing, and blessings upon you.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. All right. Any other comments or questions that someone might have? I'm going to go ahead and close off the live